Just going to wait one moment before we get started, just to let people join. I'll say also this talk is, I just realized the description is incorrect for this talk. This is a talk about failure and how it is necessary for software development and to do it well. It's clear from the title, it's not clear from the description. Sorry about that. Okay. Hello, my name is Kevin Goldsmith. I'm calling in to you today from Seattle, Washington, the west coast of the US. And I'm calling and talking today about, now why would I give a talk at a conference about failure, especially a software development conference? Well, the reason is that invention requires failure. If you could do something new, unique, novel, the first time absolutely correct, then it's probably not that interesting. It's probably not that new. If you think about what we do writing software, we are trying to innovate, we are trying to invent, we're trying to disrupt. And that is hard, and it should be hard, which means we're going to make mistakes. Now, you can believe me that to really invent something requires failure, or you can believe this guy, Albert Einstein, who said, anyone who's never made a mistake has never tried anything new. There's also the film director, Kevin Smith, who said, failure is success training. And I like this version of it because it talks about how failure is actually required to succeed. Now, if failure is inevitable, if failure is going to happen when you're trying to invent something, the question isn't how do we avoid failure? The question is how do we handle that failure when it inevitably happens? And I think about this as creating a fail-safe environment. Now, I've been in the software industry a long time. We've talked about being fail-safe for that entire time. But we used to mean, when we talked about being fail-safe, avoiding failure. We would do things like try and prove our code mathematically to guarantee that it would never fail. We don't do that anymore because it never worked. It was just too hard, it didn't work, and it was nearly impossible. And software has only gotten more complicated since then. So instead of thinking about being fail-safe as avoiding failure, instead we think about it now as how to handle failure well. And that's what I call failing smart. You're going to fail, so let's fail in a smart way so we can take advantage of that failure. Now, I used to work at Spotify, and Spotify was a company that actually did this exceptionally well. And I learned a lot while I was there. And this is what we used to call minimizing the blast radius. Now, this is a quote from Mikhail Kranz, who was the chief architect at Spotify while I was there. This is an actual quote, not from a conference talk, but from a conversation we were having in chat. And I asked him if it was okay to use it, and he said, sure. He said, we want to be an internal combustion engine, not a fuel-air bomb. Many small controlled explosions propelling us in a generally okay direction, not a huge blast leveling half the city. Now, I like this analogy as well because it means it talks about how failures can actually move you forward, how they can help you, as opposed to, and if you fail in a not great way, it can also do something like take out your company. So I think about it as failing as being the fastest, cheapest path to learn something, because that is what failure is teaching you. It's teaching you all the ways it doesn't work. But along the way, you learn all of the important things you need to do in order to do this new invention. Now, I don't know how many of you know of Clippy or Microsoft Office Assistant, but I'm betting most of you do. Even though I'm also betting that almost none of you have ever used Microsoft Office Assistant or seen it because it hasn't been in Office for 17 years now. But why have you heard of it? Because this is one of the biggest software failures of all time. It's a failure that was so big, it escaped Office. It escaped the software industry. excuse me, it became part of popular culture. It was a failure so massive that this is why you know about it. And this is why, honestly, if you tweeted about it, people would recognize it 17 years after it stopped shipping. Now, how did this massive failure happen? Well, a lot of it is how we used to ship software. So Microsoft Office Assistant, and by the way, if you haven't seen it, it was essentially a prototype or early chatbot that Microsoft added to Office. The Office application was getting complicated. Customers were having a hard time navigating it. And someone had the idea, what if we created a character that would help you understand and how to use Office and give you suggestions. And so they created this. It shipped originally in Office 97. So it's 1997. And everyone hated it. It did not go well. It is still made fun of. Now, you could say, well, obviously, whoever had this idea didn't know what they were doing. They were bad at their jobs. But if you didn't know, in 1997, Office was, and actually probably still is, if not the most successful software product of all time. It was certainly one of the top 2 or 3, with the other being Microsoft Windows. So, and Microsoft in 1997 was by far the world's most successful software company. In fact, technology company. There was Microsoft and no one else. So Office at this time was not full of people who didn't know what they were doing. This was a tough team. I worked at Microsoft at this time. I was in Microsoft research. This was a team that had incredibly bright people at the top of their careers building the most successful software product of all time in the world's most successful technology company. This was not a team of people who didn't know what they were doing. They just couldn't get it right. And a lot of it has to do with how we shipped software back then. If you look in that upper left-hand corner, you'll see this product shipped in CD-ROMs. It shipped in a box. This is the box. In fact, you can also see you could get it on 3.5-inch floppy disks as well. So the nature of how we ship software meant that it was very hard to fail fast. It was very hard to fail small. Because if you are the world's most successful technology company, building the world's 1, 2, or 3 most successful software product, what happens when you need to make a bunch of CD-ROMs? Well, you're going to need to use the pressing plants of the world. Microsoft didn't own its own CD-ROM pressing plants. They used others, which meant that in order to produce the volume of CD-ROMs they needed to, they took over the capability of the CD pressing for more or less the entire world. So if you're going to do that, while you're making your Office CDs, no music is being released, no other software is being released. These are often DVD pressing plants, no DVDs were being released. You're going to have to do that way, way, way in advance. And if you're a day late or 2 days late, what happens? Well, everyone else in the world who's waiting for that capability is now waiting another extra day, which meant every day Microsoft was late to start pressing their disks meant that millions of dollars and euros and whatever. So how do you do that? You have to book it years in advance. Years in advance the day you have to be pressing. How do you make that happen? Well, you do waterfall, you do specifications, you completely specify what the product's going to look like. And I worked on Windows, so I saw a lot of this firsthand at Microsoft. You would spend months, literally sometimes 6 months, just working on the specifications of the product. And they were down to a very fine-grained amount of detail. What every keystroke, what every mouse click does on every part of every screen in the entire product. So that you spent months doing the specifications, but at the end there was a signing ceremony when the specification was all agreed upon. The VP would sign the document, and now it was locked, and now you had to go because you knew the date you had to be done. So if you're a developer, you're typing, you're trying to get all those features that you're required to do as part of the specification done. That's all your focus. Get these implemented exactly as they were designed. And eventually you come to that date, you hit the date, the golden master, GM, is produced, the hard drive's duplicated, it's sent around the world to the CD pressing plants where they make these plastic and foil discs, they manufacture them. They're put into boxes. Those boxes are put into bigger boxes. Those bigger boxes are put onto trucks where they're taken to ships or trains, taken to another location, put on trucks, taken off the trucks, put into warehouses, taken out of the warehouses, put on trucks, taken to a store where they're unwrapped, put on the shelves. You take a bus or a train, or you walk or you drive to the store, you take the box off the shelf, you take it to the cashier, you pay for the product, you take it home, and then you spend an entire afternoon putting one disk at a time into your computer to copy the software onto your computer, or if it's floppy disk, you spend the entire day installing the software. So from the idea of Microsoft Office Assistant to the point where a customer actually sees it was at minimum 2 to 3 years. And actually, Office Assistant took longer than one release of Office. So it was maybe 3 or 4 years to fail spectacularly. Today you can ship your website, if you're building a web app, you can ship that on every save of your editor if you want. If you're making a mobile app, you could be shipping that to your customers several times a week. So now there's no excuse, right? Back then, we couldn't get software to people any faster than a couple years. Today, you can give software. You can give the software to people multiple times a day if you want. So it's a completely different world, which means that you can fail much faster. You can make those mistakes. You can put things in front of people much earlier. Now, before I worked at Microsoft, I worked at IBM. Now, I was in IBM research, and I worked on a project at IBM, a research project. It was a bit longer than a year that we were doing this project. As we reached the end of the project, we were completing the work, we were writing papers for publication. Right then, we found out that there were 2 other labs at IBM that were working on the exact same project that we had no idea about. And at the time, it seemed like utter stupidity, because if we had known about them, we could have been sharing our knowledge, we could have been working together, we would have done a lot more. So it just seemed like IBM didn't know what they were doing. They didn't even realize they'd started the same project in 3 labs. What I realized later, much later, is that IBM understood this problem of failure. Thomas Watson, one of the early CEOs of IBM, said, if you want to increase your success rate, double your failure rate. Well, if it was going to take a year or longer to fail, how do you increase your failure rate? How do you double your failure rate? Every failure takes you so long. So what IBM did was they learned to fail in parallel instead of serially. So this was a deliberate thing IBM would do. It would start the same project in multiple places and see which ones did the best things, and then take that knowledge for the next iteration. So that's how they failed faster, when it was difficult to put things in front of people quicker. If you're going to understand this aspect of failure, that failure is required to innovate, failure is required to invent, how you handle failure in your team or in your company is really important. If your team or your company is punishing failure, you're essentially telling people, don't take risks, because risks lead to failure. Don't invent, don't innovate. So if your company is telling you, or if your company's got a culture where making a mistake or not getting it right gets punished, that's really, really bad. It's more important that you take those lessons and that that is the culture. You learn from your mistakes and use that knowledge. If you punish people for failing, they are going to do everything in their power to not acknowledge a failure, or to either hide it or not discuss it, which means it's very, very hard to learn from it. And it's not easy to take the time to understand why a failure happens, because we're human. Nobody wants to dwell on their failure and think about all the things they did wrong. That's not fun. However, if you take that time, you have a ton of opportunities to learn. Every failure is going to tell you something about your process. So you may have had a conversation like this. What happened with this release? It's really buggy and the customers are unhappy. Well, the test team was working on a different project and they kind of jumped onto this one pretty late. And actually the test automation caught the issues, but it's been really flaky lately, so nobody was paying attention to it. That's a failure of process in the way you write your software. It could be your team, and when I say your team, I don't mean that your team is bad. I mean that you may not have had the right skills. Maybe you've taken on a technology as part of your project and didn't have an expert in that technology. So you didn't need different skills, or you didn't have the right mix of people on the team. Not necessarily that the individuals are not good. It's your perception of your customers. And you could say, well, I know who my customers are. Well, you might. And we do things like we do user research, and we do approximations of customers using personas. There's a lot of tools we use to kind of understand our customers. But the fact of the matter is, the more successful your software product is, the more people use it, the harder it really is to understand your customers. So you're always kind of creating approximations of who they are and what they care about, and you get that wrong. You're understanding your product, and you could say, well, I understand my product. I'm the one writing my product. And that's true, except we write software to solve a problem for someone. So let's say we wrote the software to solve problem A. Along the way, in solving problem A, we solve problem B, which is great. A bunch of customers are using our software to solve problem B. It solves problem B well. But when we go to create the new version of solving problem A, which is what our intent is, we break problem B, which was never our intent, and now we've made a bunch of people unhappy. And obviously, every failure is an opportunity to learn about yourself and how you could have done things differently. So it's worth taking the time to really understand what happened, and to understand how to do it better next time. So you may do retrospectives as part of like Scrum or some other practice that's really team focused. This is a good idea. I tell you, or I'm advocating that you do it for projects as well, for a feature, including multiple teams, if multiple teams contribute to it. And today we often do this when things go badly. You may have, in English we call it postmortems sometimes, or incidents are another kind of failure. So they tend to be associated with bad things, with failure, which stigmatizes it. Instead, if you do a project retrospective at the end of every project, successful projects or unsuccessful projects, it doesn't become something you only do when things go badly, and there's no stigma attached to it. There's no punishment as part of it. There's no blame associated with it. So you do it for successful projects, and you do it for the unsuccessful projects. Because the fact of the matter is, the most successful project you execute can still have things you could have done better, and things that you might not want to do next time. And of course, you want to understand the things you do want to do next time. And the most unsuccessful projects, actually, you might have done a few things really well that you want to do again, as well as understanding the things that didn't go well that you want to avoid next time. So understanding, getting the group that worked on it together, talking through what worked well, what didn't work well, what you want to do next time, what you want to not do next time, cataloging that is really valuable and important. And it is important to actually catalog it, to put it somewhere publicly that people can share, that people can use to learn from. It becomes a really great resource when people join the team so they can understand kind of how different things appeared in the product and different things came about. And if you end up, if you haven't led a feature before, or like you become a lead or that kind of thing on a project, it gives you the opportunity to go and understand what worked well in the past and what didn't work well. So you don't repeat those mistakes. You get to make all new ones that you can use to learn from. And the important part of this, the well-known kind of idea, is that if you don't take the time to learn from your mistakes, you're just going to keep making them over and over again. And that's just a waste of time. But also, if you share the lessons from every project with everyone else, that means others don't have to make the mistake you made. And you get to learn from their mistakes as well, which makes the entire organization, the entire team, work much better. Now, again, I worked at Spotify. Spotify was exceptionally good at this, at utilizing failure to make the company more successful. This was from one of the squad rooms on my floor where my team was. They had a fail wall where they would share the lessons that they were learning, and this wasn't something that they hid or was only visible by their team. This was facing the main kind of walkway that everybody walked through because they were right by the entrance to the floor. So this was something they were happy to share with other teams so that they could learn as well. And this you don't have to build like a complicated knowledge learning resource system to catalog those retrospectives. It could just be a folder full of Google Docs that everyone can see. You don't even need, if you like this idea of a fail wall, we've done it virtually at several companies now, just a Slack channel. Hey, let's share the lessons we're learning with everyone. That creates a really nice culture of learning and being open about making mistakes. This is a blog post, an internal blog post from the CTO at Spotify while I was there, talking about how we celebrate failures as this opportunity to learn and how we want to use those failures to learn and improve, which inspired other blog posts like this one. Now, this blog post, I think, is actually a public one. That was another thing that Spotify did, was not only share the blog post. When you look at engineering blogs on companies, it's usually, oh, we did this cool thing, or we are doing this cool thing, or we're using this great technology and it's working so well. It's a collection of, oh, how good are we, right? Because it's kind of, telling the world, oh, come work for us. One of the things I like about companies that talk about this is what we did wrong and this is what we learned about it, is it shares, no, this is a culture where we value learning from our mistakes, and we value that so much we're happy to tell the world about that. And when I look at a company, I look for those kinds of things because it sends a strong signal. And also, honestly, if you see some company and they blog about using some great technology, and you try and use it in your company and it doesn't work well and you're having all these problems, which of these blog posts is more useful to you? The blog post saying, oh, it works great and we love it, or the blog post saying, this is what was hard with it and this is how we figured it out? That's actually the more valuable thing if you're going to share your ideas. Bob Sutton is a management professor. He's also an author and a consultant. He said the most creative people and companies don't have lower failure rates. They fail faster and cheaper and perhaps learn more from their setbacks than their competitors. So how do we make failure safer? I've been talking about failing smart. I've been talking about failing small. How do we do that? So an important part of this, and as another way of thinking about this, is how do we minimize the cost of that failure? How do we be those small controlled explosions and not the big fuel air bomb? Well, this is a framework that we used at Spotify, and it combines ideas from just lean startup as well as good DevOps practices. We called it think it, build it, ship it, tweak it. Now, it's just a nice way of building features that minimizes the cost of failure. So think about it this way. This horizontal axis is time. At the left-hand side of this graph is the moment of having an idea. The right-hand side is now it's built, it's in your product, and the team has moved on to other things. The vertical axis is investment, and that can be actual money investment, time, opportunity cost. It's kind of the sum total of investment. So let's say DevDays has inspired you, and you came up during the conference with a really good idea for a new feature in your product. You go to work or dial into work the next day, tomorrow, today, and you tell your manager or you tell the product manager, oh, I have this great idea for a new feature. And then you talk about it, and they say, well, actually, that is kind of a good idea. Let's talk about it, or let's think about it. So now you've entered the think it stage. So now what you're going to do is you're going to be thinking about it. You're going to be maybe talking about it, maybe doing some prototypes, doing some paper prototypes or those kinds of things. And your investment is growing up. Not a lot. It's maybe you, a couple other people. It's not a huge ton of time, but you're investing into this. At a certain point, you get it ready and you go, you know what, let's build this for real. So now you and the rest of the team is getting involved. So now that investment goes up very, very sharply. So we want to minimize the time because now we're investing, but we're getting no return. No one's using it yet. So how do you do that? If you have this great idea, but you want to shorten the amount of time, the way before you get it to people, how do you do that? You create an MVP. You don't create the fully realized, complete version of the feature. You do a very small version of that feature, so that you can get it into front of people as quickly as possible. What you're trying to do is find the minimalist, smallest version of that feature that actually tells you something, whether it's a good idea or not. So you see it's relatively small. When you're ready, at the end of build it, you're ready to actually put it in front of people. So now you're shipping it. And in a lot of companies, that ship it is a binary thing. It goes from not shipped to shipped. So all of a sudden, you go from no one's got it to all of your customers have it. Now, in this graph, that ship it is actually bigger than the build it. And why is that? The reason is because you're not going to give it to all your customers simultaneously, because that is how you create a fuel air bomb. If you did it wrong, if you built the wrong thing, you've now inflicted it upon all of your customers. Instead, you do a progressive rollout. You do A/B testing. You put it in front of a small cohort of your users and see. You have a lot of telemetry, of course, so you see how they're using it. Are they using it in the way that you thought they would? Are they actually finding it valuable? And you get to make a choice. Let's say you give it to 5% of your customers. And what you can see is, oh, okay, we thought that this feature would increase conversion. Is it increasing conversion? Oh, yes, it is. Great, let's give it to 10% of the users. If you see it and it doesn't increase conversion, if that's what your goal was, now you can make a decision. Oh, was this a good idea that we maybe didn't implement correctly? Or was this a bad idea and maybe we should just remove it? It didn't work out. Or is this a good idea, but we could do it in a better way? This gives you an opportunity before you give it to all your customers to actually make changes and learn and improve. But let's say it does work the way you want, so you give it to more and more users. Another great thing about this is if you have a quality problem or a scaling problem, you discover that early and you can fix it before it fails in front of all your customers. So that's why you do it in this way, and it works exceptionally well. If you have a small number of customers, those buckets, that not 1% or 5%, 10%, they may be 25% or 50% if you don't have a lot of customers. But still, you want to not give it to everybody all at once, because that gives you a lot more chances to improve it. Now, at the end of the ship it phase, it's now given to all your customers, which is great. But it's not the full version of the feature. It's this MVP version of the feature. So how do you get the rest of that? This is where we go into tweak it. So in the tweak it phase, you're now taking that and you're continuing to improve it, and you're iterating on it in a series of these kind of mini think it, build it, ship it, tweak it phases. It's just a series of these, adding in new parts to this vision and new parts to this vision. And of course, over time, you're getting closer to the original version or vision, or the improvements you're making aren't really having any effect. The metrics, the telemetry is telling you, okay, well, we're making this change, but it's basically it's good now. We don't really need to change anymore. So what happens is people start rolling off onto other work. That's where the investment goes down. But you'll see it never goes to zero. The investment never goes to zero. Whenever something is in your product, it's always in your product. It's always going to cost. You do a new version of a library, the feature breaks, and you have to go fix it. Or you do a new language and you have to translate it. Or you have other features and they would be really good in this part of the UI, but this feature is there. So now you got to deal with that. All these things mean that it is important to only put features in your product or create products that actually add value, that somehow improve things. Because the cost, even if you get it all done and you say, well, it's not really hurting anything, even though it doesn't really help a lot, that actually doesn't make sense, because you're always going to be kind of supporting this thing that you did. So you're looking at this shaded area that you're trying to minimize, because up until you've shipped it, you're investing, but you're not getting any return on your investment. And you're trying to make that shaded area as small as possible. Now, beyond just reducing the amount of time to get something in front of your customers, and then not giving it to all your customers at once, but rolling it out so you can see how they interact with it, there's a bunch of other things you can do at every stage to catch these issues. You can do, as I talked about in the Think It, you could be doing paper prototypes or mock-ups or user testing. In the Build It, you've got MVPs, employee testing. Maybe you have a beta group that you can give it to of customers even before, while you're building it, and give them early access. As you're shipping it, of course, now as you're in front of customers, you've got A/B testing, user testing, you've got your analytics and telemetry, and you're rolling out gradually. And then, of course, in Tweak It, it's in the market, and you're continuing to do some of these things. Each one of these is an opportunity for you to say, you know what, we thought this was going to be good. It isn't. Let's save the investment and stop now. Or we thought this was going to be good. It isn't. Let's figure out what we need to change to actually make it successful before we give it to all of our customers. Now, I'm going to end with a story, the lesson of my biggest failure, my biggest professional failure so far. And this is another Spotify story. When I was at Spotify in the fall of 2014, we learned that Apple Music was going to launch. So at that point, Spotify was really kind of finally getting ahead of all the other streaming music services. It had kind of emerged from all of them, and it was now becoming the true leader of streaming music space. And Apple Music at that time, and still is the world's largest music retailer. So knowing that the world's largest music retailer was about to enter the streaming space to compete with you was a pretty scary idea. And we became aware that this was going to happen. We knew about when it was going to launch. And so we decided what we're going to do at Spotify is we're going to, right before Apple Music launches, we're going to have our own event. And in this event, we're going to showcase a whole bunch of new innovation to show that we're not just going to let Apple come in and take it from us. We're going to prove to the world that we are still the innovators in streaming music. So we had about 6 months. We didn't know the exact date Apple Music was going to launch, but we knew kind of about when. So we had about 6 months. We started looking around to see different ideas. There were a bunch of things in Think It's that were there, early stages of Build It. We came up with some new things. We put a good kind of story around the whole thing, created a collection of these features, and we called it Spotify Now. And we were going to build this and launch this right before Apple Music shipped. But the press also knew that Apple Music was coming, and they were watching Spotify very, very closely. And in our Think It's and Build It's and Ship It's and stuff, it was we'd had multiple occasions where members of the press were in our A/B tests and then would write about features that we were actively working on, some of which we canceled because they didn't work well or they didn't work the way we wanted them to. So we didn't want anyone to know about all these cool things we were doing because that would kind of ruin our event. We also knew that the press was getting really good at kind of going through our binaries to find resources to get insight into some of the things we were working on. So this meant that what we wanted to do to have this big event was to not do our normal get the value in front of the customers as early as possible to find feedback. We decided, okay, what we're going to do this time is we're going to not do it that way. We're going to do this more in secret, keep it from our customers until the last possible moment. So we're building. It was things were going forward. The teams were working. This was the largest. So I was leading the engineering effort. It was the largest project Spotify had ever done. Hundreds of developers, hundreds of licensing people and product. The whole business was 100% working on this. It was a massive effort. And we're building it. And it's going and it's going and it's going. And we're using internal versions to try it out. And it started to feel not great. Right? It was supposed to be this innovative collection of things that was going to really transform how music listening worked, but it really wasn't doing that for those of us who were using it, using early versions of it. And we started to get worried. Is this actually going to be that successful thing? We're so used to putting our ideas in front of our customers early and getting that feedback, and now we don't have that. We know we're not good approximations of our customers. We understand the product too well. So we knew that we weren't good proxies for the customers, but it still didn't feel right, and we were getting nervous. Eventually, I was able to convince the product and marketing teams to let us test. Please, you got to let us put this in front of people just so that we know what's going on. And eventually, I got them to agree. They said, okay, we'll do this. We're going to put this in front of a cohort of users in New Zealand. So we found a small cohort of users. We gave them the features. Luckily, just luckily, none of them were in the press, so none of it leaked. We gave them the features as we were building, and then we waited to see what was going on. And I would go to the analysts every other day or something like that just to find out what's happening, like how is this going? And they would say, well, it's too early, it's too early, it's too early. And eventually, though, we got the results. And the results, I said, how is it? And the results were amazing. So retention is, for a subscription product, retention is a prime determiner of lifetime value. Because if you're subscribing and you stay subscribed, you continue to pay the subscription fee. So retention was one of the core metrics I cared about leading the consumer group at Spotify. And this feature, these collections of features, Spotify Now, in our test cohort, increased retention by 6%. Now, this is a ridiculously high number, like amazing. At the scale of Spotify, to change any one of those core metrics, like a full digit, would have been a tremendous success. Changing it 6% was obviously whatever doubts we had were wrong. It was a timed party. This was going to be the most successful thing Spotify had ever done. It was very, very clear. So, okay, all doubts were gone. We were excited. We were working. And finally, it came time for the launch. So the day of the launch, we hit our schedule. Everything was great. We had this big event in New York where the company executives were, talking about all the new features with the rock stars and TV stars. Back in Stockholm, Me and my product peer, the design peer, we were on stage with all the employees watching the event and drinking champagne and having cake and celebrating our, this big launch. And the event ended and we hit go and we shipped it. But of course, I wasn't going to let us immediately ship this to 100% because we still needed to do that rollout. One, to make absolutely certain that this was what we thought it was going to be, but also, honestly, because we had all these new features, I wanted to make sure they were going to scale. But I thought, we already know it's going to be successful, so it's really just making sure that everything scales correctly and there isn't any bugs we missed. So we ship it. It goes to 1% of our core users in our top 4 markets, and then we wait. We wait and see how it's going. And every day I'm going to the analysts. I'm going, okay, like, where are the numbers? Where are the numbers? And they say, oh, it's way too early. We don't know the numbers yet. Okay, I'll come back in a few days. Come back in a few days. How is it doing? Do we have the numbers? Well, we're starting to get them, and we're starting to get some directionality, but it's still too early. But it's maybe not what we thought it was going to be. Okay, I'll come back. I come back. How is it looking? It's not looking good, but we don't have the final numbers yet. Come back tomorrow. So I come back tomorrow, and they say, yeah, it's not what we thought. And I said, well, what does this mean? So we didn't get 6%. What we get, like 3% or something like that? And they said, well, actually, we didn't get 6% increase. We had a 1% decrease. Now we have a significant problem. We have a real problem, because we just had a massive press event. We had articles appearing in press all through the world talking about all these great innovative features that Spotify was about to launch. Apple Music had announced their event. They were getting ready to launch their product. And we couldn't give those new innovative features to our customers, because if we did, they would quit using our app. A 1% retention decrease means every month you lose 1% of your customers. We had made the app worse. But also, because of the way we done it, where we released a ton of stuff simultaneously, we didn't know what we'd done wrong. We had telemetry, but it was all together. We'd created a fuel air bomb, not a set of small controlled explosions. And we couldn't give it to our customers because they wouldn't like it. And we couldn't figure out what we'd done wrong because we'd done it too big. We'd released too many things simultaneously. This started probably one of the toughest summers of my life, and certainly my team, because we spent the whole summer then putting in new tests to this cohort of users, this 1% of users that had these features, because we were trying to figure out what we'd done wrong. And in fact, actually, we had to keep adding new users into the cohort because they were quitting the app because they didn't like these features. And we were trying different experiments to figure out what we'd done wrong. Eventually, and along the way, we learned a ton. We learned so much about myths of our users and myths of our product and process problems. We learned so much. It was not a fun summer because we were trying to figure out what was going on so we could ship these features to our customers. But we learned a lot during this time. And I'll tell you, because you're probably wondering, one of the biggest issues was a process problem, which was we had a bug in our A/B testing system, and we had simultaneously deployed 2 different tests to the same cohort of users in New Zealand. One test was these new Spotify Now features. The other test was turning off premium, giving premium features to our non-premium customers. So that had changed our results pretty significantly. We'd actually hurt their results because they were trying to establish a baseline. So from this, though, we learned a ton about our product. Eventually, we were able to ship. We didn't get 6% retention increase. We got a 1%-ish retention increase, so it was okay. But from this came a ton of the innovation that has kept Spotify continuing to grow faster than Apple Music. From this came podcasts, video, the curated editorial playlists like Rap Caviar that drive millions and millions and millions of listens and make stars out of artists. From this came Discover Weekly and Release Radar and daily mixes and feature after feature after feature that come from the lessons we learned during this process. And to Spotify's credit, as I said, they were very good at failure and handling failure. And so instead of me and my peers who led this project being punished, instead we were celebrated and promoted because of how we handled it. So I'm going to leave you with a final thought. Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. So I think I have a couple minutes for questions, or I may not, sorry. I will look at the questions in the chat and try and respond to them. If you have other questions, feel free to, this is my Twitter or my websites, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to check the questions. Sorry, I didn't have the tab loaded. So psychological safety and is not equal to Stack Overflow. Yes, that is absolutely right, Sandra. All right. Thank you, everybody. I think I'm over time.